And welcome to this special Wednesday Wisdom series that we do every Wednesday. And today, the discussion is as critical as it is every week. We're going to talk about the new education policy and the future. How does it impact the future? And joining me today would be Mr. S.S. Mantha, former chairman, All India Council for Technical Education. Welcome, sir. Mr. Vinesh Menon, CEO, Education Consulting and Scaling Ampersand Group. Ms. Surabhi Goel, CEO, Aditya Birla World Academy, the Aditya Birla Integrated School and Aditya Birla Education Academy. Welcome, Ms. Goel. We have with us Mr. Vijay Shukhla, Managing Partner, Eduvisors, and Dr. Suchitra, Bhattacharya, Principal, Manav Rachna School, Faridabad. Welcome all of you. So I am just filling in the initial 5 minutes till Mr. Batra is going to join us. He is in a bad network right now. So welcome all of you. So I want to first start, my initial question would be to Dr. Mantha. Sir, I want to understand from you the initial comments that you would have on the new education policy. How do you see it? What would be the long-term impact of this policy on the future of Indian curriculum, Indian education landscape?
Yeah, good evening, all the my co-panelists and all the participants, and Dr. Batra will be joining us, and the others. First of all, I believe our PM said a few days back, national education policy aims to transform the intent and the content of the education sector. Now, this is a very profound statement. There is nothing wrong or one can fault with on the content. However, content needs implementation. That can be a real challenge, and that's what probably people are working for in the future, and they'll be working for in the future. Now, most of the challenges, they have some intrinsic opportunities. Learning how corporations have, unlocked value in times of distress would be some pointer to see how the implementation of education policy happens. Now, very quickly, I'll go through 3-4 points. If we look at the beginning of the 19th century and throughout the 19th century, we had mass production and where centralized functions like operations, sales, and finance, they were all centralized. And over a period of time, that model was transformed to diversified offerings, and it moved into new regions a few decades later. And every company like General Motors or DuPont, they created business units structured around products in geographic markets. The same thing needs to happen within the NEP, because we have an opportunity now to really make over the difficulties that we had in the previous implementations and so on. Probably a strong business reprocessing kind of mechanics will have to work around the objectives of NEP, and if they have to become real. So which means that we, using technology instead of traditional functional faculty-centric courses and geographic boundaries, we need to break all that. Then there is a lot of talk about online and distance education and the GER of 25 transforming to 50 and so on. It's a possibility. I mean, in the next 5 years, in fact, the NEP says 10 to 15 years. But I believe a virtual and networked institution and, the introduction of MOOCs and so on has great potential to really get the 25 to 50, GER. And we need online blended learning modes. And then the national skill qualification framework must be seamlessly built into the system. It must be institutionalized within the system to get the hands-on skills that people are talking about. We need actually some our universities to metamorphose into what are called as Velcro institutions in spirit, which means that they must be capable of being pulled apart and reassembled in new ways to respond to changing opportunities and so on. Now, the one more important point is the NEP talks about credit bank and multi-point entry, exit, and so on. These are extremely good pointers within the NEP. But again, there are implementation challenges. But imagine if you look at today's computer company, for example, it can manufacture components in China, they assemble them in Mexico, ship them to Europe, and service the purchases from call centers in India and things like that. Similar things will have to happen in education with the use of credit bank and multi-point entry, exit, and so on. I'll just give you one example on that. Imagine a complete personalized learning pursuit. Suppose you get a good physics course from Punjab University, the credits accrued from that, a mathematics from TIFR, astronomy course from, let's say, Batra Research Institution, AI from IIT Hyderabad. Put them all together, astrophysics, you put them together to build a astrophysics, program through an enablement that's done by the virtual university concept. So these are some of the very, very important pointers within the NEP, and one can make a lot of value addition with that. Even within the business business area, one can improve business skills with a course in agile management from, let's say, some university like Martin Crowe, a leadership primer from Texas University, and so on. So build them together, build credits, accumulate credits, build your own degrees, diplomas. All those possibilities are there. Finally, I just have one other thing. The PM also very succinctly put it, from the education must move from what to think to how to think. Now, this means that traditional memory skills must change to thinking skills. Now, that's where the curriculum modification and things like that will have to happen. Finally, the idea should be our future universities, they must coexist with the industry. And they must become large, multi-product, multi-process, multifunctional businesses. All these are possible within the implementation strategies that you build around NEP. So I believe all in all, the intent is there, but the implementation challenges will have to be tackled as we go along. Thank you.
Right. Dr. Mantha, thank you so much for these initial comments. I want to come to you, Ms. Goel. How do you see this? What are your initial comments on this policy? How do you see this as a game changer as far as the education sector is concerned?
Thank you for having me over, and thank you, Dr. Mantha, for setting the context. Great vision statement. I think it's a very, very progressive policy. Very excited about it. To start off, the spends have increased from 3.1%. It's been hovering around 3.1% for the last 2 years. They've taken up the spends to 6%, though I'm not sure how much will that get implemented, because of the COVID situation and the funds being required for that, of course. Very happy about bringing the ECCE under the fold. Will, put a curb on all those mom and pop kind of establishments, setting up of preschools and shops and garages, etc. Hopefully the NCF will put together the entire curriculum for this, especially for the 3 to 6 years old, because that's such an important age for getting the students to be ready for school. Very, again, happy with the reduced pressure on the board exams. As somebody who runs schools, also as a mom of a 12-year-old, I understand the pressure. Historically, we've seen the US universities always ask for the 9, 10th, 11th, 12th, four grades. So, all your life is not dependent upon just one particular grade exam. It's a do or die situation. So I think that's a great move. Of course, a lot of unlearning by the parents will have to be done. Dr. Mantha has spoken about the whole approach to multidisciplinary, options of subjects being, somebody can take physics as well as economics together. I think that's a great, great move. Also happy about the 360-degree assessment pattern, bringing in the self and the peer and the teacher assessments. I don't know how the rubrics will have to be made and how it will be conveyed. But it's, I think, a great move, again, to diversify the whole assessment pattern that we, I think, currently have. So all in all, I would say lots of talking points, lots of things that, vision is out there. We just have to fill in the blanks, start putting in the blocks and completing that puzzle.
Right. Mr. Menon, your thoughts on this also, like we had our previous education policy that we have been adhering to. How much of that, needed actually total overhaul, and what could be retained in the new policy? Your thoughts on this question?
No, I think first of all, the very fact that the old education policy was enforced nearly 3.5 decades ago itself showed that there is, it really warranted a change. I mean, let's really go back, right? I mean, the first ever conceptualization of education happened somewhere in the 50s. I'm told that around 1952 is when the first, I don't think it was called a policy then, it was called more of a commission. And that really conceptualized education. Okay, number two, so I think the next one came about in the late 60s. I think 1968 is when I think brought the whole 10+2 schooling format. And that itself took almost 10 years for it to get implemented across all the states. Now, the 1986 policy really focused on what we missed those days, which is ICT, the entire technology build, the initiation into computer technology. And we wanted to also bring about a scientific temper. So that really needed, that was the need of the hour then. And that's the reason why that happened then. Now, 34 years, the entire system has changed. The country has changed. I was in a, at the privy to a conference 2 days back when an 18-year-old child was actually a moderator of a panel like this, right? So that's the real change that is happening to the new generation. And in 2020, this is an era when, knowledge is available in abundance, and the whole objective is really to connect the knowledge and to deploy it very effectively in places. So from that perspective, the context really required a complete repositioning. And if in a way we had to move away from this global best practices to what is called an India-centric approach. So really speaking, what I would say is that this particular policy is really India-centric. It's been designed to take care of, as my previous speakers mentioned, to take care of the way our minds function very, very differently. It really takes care of starting it really from the foundation of a child. So that way, I think there's a tremendous change from what has been in 1986.
Right. Dr. Bhattacharya, your quick thoughts on this.
It's very well explained by three of my speakers who spoke before me. Frankly speaking, I will be going straight into the school, being a school head. It's a wonderful policy that has come up, and children, especially children and parents, are so very happy with the new ones. There is a little query on in their mind too, that how is going to happen, like how is the assessment going to happen. However, we are explaining to them that NEP is, as Sir said, Menon Sir said, it's come after 34 years, and it is emphasizing on 100% youth and adult literacy. There, the changes which has come up is the curriculum will be flexible. It will be having creative combination of subjects, which is very much helpful, which will be very much helpful for the children. And when it comes to any stream, any subjects, that's the best part of it, because all these days what we thought is a science child is supposed to, that's a mindset that people had, that a child who's in the science stream is supposed to be a very a child who's good in studies, which will just go. That is something. And again, when you're taking vocational courses, we always had the mindset, the third person in front would say, okay, that means this child is having some mental issues, if not problems, but yeah, he is not up to the standard of the IQ, EQ level, must be having some problems. Here in this particular process, this will just go. Anyone taking up vocation, like if it's introduced from a middle school, I think that's wonderful, and that is something which we were waiting for in the education system. And even in the higher education system, like when they are saying that you can take the credits and then you can utilize it, I suppose it's a wonderful progressive policy that we are having. And implementation, as Sir said, Mantha Sir also said, implementation is something which we stakeholders, we the policy, I will not say policy makers, yes, everyone will have to ensure, the teachers, the principals, the parents will have to ensure that the implementation is done in a perfect manner. That is something which is now in our hands, and I suppose with such a progressive policy, if implementation is done in a correct manner, we are going to definitely see much better days.
Mrs. Shukhla, your first comments on this policy, how do you see it? Sorry, your audio is muted.
Yeah, thanks, Rohil. That's a challenge when you have to speak after the four eminent speakers have already spoken and covered very many important aspects. And I particularly liked Dr. Mantha's focus on implementation, which was also carried forward by the other panelists. I have a little bit of a different view on the new education policy. I would, if I have to, give it a rating, I would give it 7 or 7.5 out of 10. Not to say that, to criticize is easy, right? But I just, would like to take this opportunity to talk about some of the very, very strong and innovative measures that have come in, and on certain aspects and in certain dimensions where the new education policy remains surprisingly silent. So, if you allow, I'll take about 4 to 5 minutes to explain a little bit of a background about policy. These policies, particularly in education sector, don't come around very often. The last time when it came, I was in school, and now here I'm nearly towards the end of my career, and the next policy has come in, and it's a great opportunity to change the education structure, the systems, the goals, the aspirations, etc. And policy can be viewed in two different ways, Rohil. One is this entire policy change, which is what has happened, and it has for good. There are a lot of good things about it. The other aspect is to use new education policy or new policy for reform. For some reason, the reform aspect has, the policy has been high on change, but low on reform. So that's one thing I just wanted to highlight. So basically, you look at, the ability to do, there are two aspects, doing things differently and doing different things, as you know.
Right.
So doing things differently means, you focus on efficiency, making the current structure as good as possible. Been trying to find out weaknesses, trying to build on your strengths and so on. But doing different things basically means, trying to do things which have not been done, which have not been tried. So the current new education policy of 2020 focuses 80% on doing things differently, which is good news. But doing different things, I think it falls short of expectation. Now, if we go back in time and ask ourselves, why did we need a new education policy at the first place? One, of course, the world has changed, but so have the teachers, so have the generations. There are a lot of changes that have happened in the society and educational system. But there are certain fundamental things in terms of the quality of the education system in India. If you were to ask a commoner, an educationist, a student, saying that are we proud of our education system, the probable answer is no or maybe. Very few people will say yes with a thumping noise, saying that our education system is best in the world, or best in Asia at least. And so fundamentally, I'll just quickly, because we have not a lot of time, so list out maybe 10, 12 challenges, which are basically the drivers for the government or people at the helm of affairs in education and also the country to say that we need a new policy. So what are those challenges? One is a big thing, everybody knows, we keep talking about quality, access and equality. A lot of work has been done in the last 50 years or maybe 60 years, 70 years in terms of providing access and also equity. But quality remains to be, remains a big question mark everywhere. And it's not just government versus private. Quality remains a question mark across the type of organizations, type of higher ed, type of school education, and type of other institutions. The other is, you look at, what are the other challenges? Government institutions, particularly K-12, enrollments are shrinking. It is so sad to see that, government education is free. Not just free, you provide midday meals, you provide all sorts of, bells and whistles and so many attractive things for students to come. but 2020 is a landmark year where the government enrollment in government schools has fallen to a level which is less than the enrollment in private schools. All this while, private school people would say, private school is also there, there's no problem, but largely it's government, it's a public service, government responsibility. But so falling enrollment, despite all the freebies and huge amounts of investment made by the government, is an alarming situation. So that is another trigger. Then the trigger is another small trigger is, and stop me if I'm overstepping on the time. Another trigger.
2 moments, yeah.
Okay. Another trigger is student migration in higher ed. We lose so much of bright talent to the US, UK, Australia, Canada, and so many other geographies. That has to be looked at. Then unemployable youth. NASCOM has done phenomenal work, but you ask anyone, graduate but unemployable, postgraduate but unemployable, eyes open, mind shut. That's the sad situation of our education system. And we cannot wash our hands saying, "Nee, it's a problem of the individual." I mean, if it was a small percentage, it is okay, but significant percentage being educated but unemployable, big question mark on higher ed. Right. Then I'll just cover the main points. Not enough innovation and entrepreneurship, out of school numbers going up, coaching and tuition. I would have loved to see coaching and tuition aspects covered in the new education policy. I mean, it has been mentioned in sparingly at 2-3 different places, but it just is silent. It is saying that it's some sort of a disease or something which is plaguing our society. That's the mention of coaching and tuition. But you put your hand on your heart. Whoever can afford tries to get into coaching or the tuition. I'm not getting into the details, but that's the reality. The education policy must cover such aspects. Like what Dr. Suchitra mentioned about this, mom and pop play schools, like that. Then the entry barrier to establish and operate educational institutions, whether it is K-12, private sector, K-12 or higher ed. That's another area, very, very big area of concern. Then last 2-3 points, not enough teaching faculty and not good enough teaching faculty. So these are some of the things. Right. Having said that, I would conclude in maybe 30 seconds. There are very many positives in the new education policy, including the intention, as Dr. Mantha also mentioned, transparency, inclusivity, technology, resource sharing, 21st century skills. And it's the first policy that talks about goals, plans, and monitoring. No earlier education policy has talked about plans and monitoring in that level. The 4 points which I think should have been covered are coaching and tuition related matters, structural reforms, international students, and this entire concept of teach. Last point, teach less. Last point, Goel, teach less and learn more approach. That is somewhat missing. Yeah. Okay. I'm done. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes. Great. Dr. Mantha, I want to come to you again. Let's not also forget that it has been our previous education policy that, of course, I mean, we do have a standing. I mean, look at our software engineers, for example, the doctors that we have produced. It is not, we can't totally discount our previous education policy. My question is that how often should education policies get revised? Should there be a time frame to it? Like the last one took 3 decades plus to get revised. Do you think the government has to set a time frame for a revision of new policies?
And first of all, your question on the earlier policies delivering and so on. We had some very good policies even before this one. The earlier policies did their bit for the higher education system. We are all products of that education system. And several of us have really done well, and many of them have built the economies around the world. So purely looking at the outcomes, I don't think there could be fundamental issues on educational policies. They all talk about good things. Where it matters is the implementation. Even the earlier policies would probably fall on certain implementation aspects. Now, having said that, the ecosystem would probably decide how often we would want to change the education policy. Obviously, like you change the curriculum every 3 years, you can't possibly change a policy every 3-4 years. But the For example, the earlier education policies did give us a GER in higher education in excess of 25. It's about 25 point something today. The primary education, if you see, is the gross enrollment ratio there is almost 97, 98. And in the secondary education, it falters. It comes down to almost 64%. So there have been gaps in those areas, and probably there should have been something done to bridge that gap. One fundamental problem is when you move out from from primary to secondary schools, not many primary schools are available near the people, So once they finish the primary school, they have to travel maybe 3-4 kilometers and so on. So one possibility could have been to upgrade all the primary schools to secondary level and make them available to these children around their place of living and so on. So those are implementation issues. They don't really come back into changing an education policy. So, but what has changed is in the last 15, 20 years, technology has changed by a large amount, and that technology should have driven the education policy maybe a decade earlier. That would have set the context for today's change that we are seeing, and the way technology has intruded almost every single aspect of our life. So probably this education policy that has come today should have probably come 10 years back, so that we would have reaped the benefit of that change, those changes in terms of technology, in education today. So in that context, yes, probably this education policy is a little late by probably a decade to account for the changing ecosystem. So I won't really, but in period to come now, probably this time to the next policy must shrink, because the changes are absolutely profound, and the kind of technology that is coming in will keep driving the education system, in every aspect, be it at the primary level, be it at the secondary level, be it at the tertiary level, higher education level, and so on. So that's my understanding.
So Dr. Batra is here, so over to you, sir.
Thank you, Goel, thank you for doing a great job at getting opening comments from everyone. Goel is a senior editor with us. He's been working with me 8 years. Still hasn't lost hair, but I'm trying. I heard all of you on your opening comments. The question I want to ask you is, all of you talk about implementation. All of you some of you have alluded to funding, right? At the end of the day, the tiger in the room is, one is intent, implementation, and then is money. There is money also needed. And in the policy, it is envisaged that we will spend 6% of our GDP on education, right?
Yeah, that's right.
The American average is 5%. Some countries in Europe spend as high as 7.5%. But 6% is a good number. But we currently spend only 2.5%. So where will this money come? Is this way of privatizing everything that exists, and in some way giving away, because education is a responsibility. It's the foundation. I mean, as you rightly said, some of you, that there is the right to education, which is till class 8th. We'll take it to class 12th, and we've set some targets. I mean, there are people who criticize those targets, saying they're unrealistic targets, right? But it's good to have unrealistic targets and get somewhere. That's one approach. So I want to ask all the esteemed panelists here their views on is 5% also achievable? Forget 6%. And if yes, how? If not, what can be done to get this 5%? As you know, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India has pointed out that the money budgeted for education has not been spent. It has not been spent on education. So it's great to make a policy. But how do you actually, because if there's no funding, nothing else will move. All the ideas will remain paper ideas. So I want to start with asking Mr. Vijay Shukhla and then go around the house.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Batra. Thank you, Dr. Batra. I think you've pointed out a very, very pertinent point. So there are two things I would like to share, in this so-called, allocation of budget and also deployment, etc. Matter. One is this entire, supply side financing, which the government of India has been following. I think that is an extremely inefficient way. So if we look at the absolute amount of money, it is not less. I mean, we are talking about lakhs of crores of rupees. It is significantly a good amount. But the moment you get into supply side financing, basically you are putting money in a structure which then gives benefit to the end beneficiary. Now compare that with the demand side financing, saying that, okay, I'm not sponsoring the government institutions so much, definitely the K-12 aspect. I am only saying, to bring in accountability and to bring more value for money, or, because at the end of the day, it is taxpayers' money which is being spent, right? What the government must follow, and I'm disheartened that it has not been captured in the new education policy, is the demand side financing. Like how it has been done, the entire Modi government's direct benefit transfer program, so many other sectors have benefited. Rather than, going through this old archaic system of, giving money, ration card, this, that, whatever, different system, you give money in the hands of the end beneficiary and let the end beneficiary go and choose. So that is one aspect, which makes this entire, so it's not so much about the amount. The amount is already pretty good. We have to make it more efficient. One, through supply side financing. Second is through use of technology. See, we are still, despite so much talk about technology and, the way different, delivery models, etc., nobody has envisaged a classroom with 200 students. Now, the earlier days, when, there was one-on-one, and there have been several studies that, have said that, either you do a tutoring model, which is basically 1:7, 1:8, no more. The moment you are going 1:30, 1:40, 1:50, 1:30 and 1:50, there's hardly any difference, because, if it's a 30, 45 minutes class, we are talking about, give or take of, 60 seconds per student. So why can't we stretch our money and say that, let us just use it for, classes of varied size. And also the plan does, policy does talk about flexibility, but, specifically, if you have flexible delivery structures, your money will be used more, which will be more efficient. The last point on this topic is this entire midday meal concept. It's a great concept, but it is probably a concept which should be taken up by Women and Child Development Ministry or Social Justice or some other ministry. It is not education. The entire country is trying to think that giving meals to a student means education, which it is not. And it is thousands of crores going in midday meals. And it's an emotional issue. It's a sensitive issue. So people think, "Padhai chal rahi hai," but it's not education.
You have to do the right thing for the right reason in the right.
Yeah. So I'm.
What's important? Why you're
Yes.
coming to the school? Are you coming here for education, or are you coming here for meal?
Yes, sir, Dr. Batra. That's what happens when your product is weak. Why do people go out and give freebies? Because, if your product is weak, you have to say, oh, here is discount, here is buy one, get one, and those kind of things. Look at, so many government schools, and I'm so sad that, the enrollment numbers are dropping, so much so that the policy document mentions that it is becoming difficult for the government, especially in school education, to make certain units economically viable, and hence, the government has put it in the policy document that we should have bigger schools. Now it is contrary to the common understanding of education, is that smaller schools you have better understanding of the student has better understanding of the teacher, and the education levels are much better. But then, because of administrative and governance and financial related reasons, the government is now forced to say bade schools hone chahiye, even in smaller cities and towns and villages. So I mean, in summary, it's not about so much about quantum of the money. I mean, all said and done, we are not a very rich developed nation. We need to make do with whatever money we have. But it is very, very critical that the money is utilized under the right heads and in the right structure and the right channels.